This is the argument for the negative. Equipping police officers with body cameras is a reactive approach that completely bypasses the root cause of the issue of police brutality. I'm first going to address topicality and dispute my opponent's definition, then argue that their case doesn't address the real issue, and I will finish with a disadvantage. So to begin, subpoint A, topicality. My opponent defines misconduct as wrong behavior. The term misconduct is defined as a culpable neglect of duties by Google Dictionary. Culpable comes from the Latin word culpa, which means guilty, criminal, at fault, or to blame. Thus, my opponent is saying that the majority of police officers are guilty criminals and are at fault or to blame for making poor decisions in sometimes life-threatening situations. What my opponent fails to address is what is really the root cause of these police officers making these poor judgment decisions, and whether or not the misconduct is intentional misconduct or it's driven by racial or implicit bias. Subpoint B, violation. My opponent's plan text assumes willful misconduct and is a reactive attempt to fix a deep-seated problem. My opponent is not offering a proactive solution to reduce the incidence of police brutality. Subpoint C, standards. This resolution is a potentially punitive resolution. To videotape police officers is a means to keep them in line, to scare them into performing. The second standard is grounds. My opponent is proposing that technology is the answer to racial and implicit bias and will scare the non-performing officers straight when addressing the root cause will enable real and lasting change. Subpoint D, impacts. The plan text does not address the problem of lack of training and support for police officers and will create a false sense of security while continuing to put citizens at risk. We have to address the real issue. So let's talk about the case. My opponent says that wearing a body camera will reduce police misconduct because video creates compelling evidence of police misconduct and can be used to train and discipline police officers. What my opponent doesn't address is the fact that a police officer can fail to turn on the camera or turn it on too late to capture the incident. The use of the camera is left to the police officer's discretion. So if you're an angry police officer or racially motivated to harm someone, you could, in effect, claim that there was some type of a technology glitch and fail to record the incident. Even if the video is captured, it's already too late. You can't undo the harm done by that police officer. It's a very reactive approach to a very real problem. My opponent also says that body cameras reduce complaints against police officers in the field. My opponent refers to data pointing to improvements in the incidents due to the cameras. A more recent study done by David Yoakum at the BCDC in Washington showed that there is absolutely no impact made by wearing a body camera. This was an 18-month study of police officers in Washington, and it found that officers used force and prompted civilian complaints at about the same rate as those police officers who didn't wear them. There was an original study done in Rialto that sparked this trend of thinking body cameras was the answer or the solution. The difference between the Washington study and the Rialto study, the Rialto study was only 54 police officers. The Washington study, over 18 months, followed 2,000 police officers. Based on this new study, there is absolutely no justification for moving forward with body cameras. What I want to point out about Advantage 1 and 2 is that my argument about getting to the real issue or root cause is why my opponent's plan will not work. My opponent needs to show how a camera will fix the issue of racial or implicit bias. Let's move on to the disadvantage. The issue is implicit bias and racism and lack of police training. Subpoint A, uniqueness. Technology does not cure racism, and the problem is bigger than just making a video. Subpoint B, link. On the surface, using a camera to disconnect or to document a police officer's behavior sounds like a great idea. Yeah, just make a video. Everything will be great. The bad guy police officer will turn it off, and the good guy police officer will continue to do his job. There is absolutely no benefit. This is not going to stop a citizen from being harmed. It's like going to the doctor, being sick, say that you've got a fever, you're sick, you go to the doctor, and you see the doctor, and the doctor doesn't ask you any questions, just writes you a prescription and says, here you go, here's a prescription, you'll be fine. You go home, he wrote you the wrong prescription, you don't get better. It's very similar to that. The patient won't get well, and putting a body camera on a police officer, as we've already shown in this Washington study, is not going to make a difference, because the real issue is implicit bias and racial discrimination. Subpoint C, internal link. My opponent's plan will create a false sense of security and allow the problem to get worse. We won't spend the time and money training police officers, giving them the training they need to learn more about implicit bias and racial bias, or give them the support to overcome those issues that they might not even be aware of. That's the thing with implicit bias. You aren't even aware that you have that bias. Subpoint D. As you can see, my opponent's plan doesn't even scratch the surface of the problem. It's like putting lipstick on a pig. It doesn't make the pig look any better, right? We must get to the root cause of the issue and put together a solution that solves for the root cause of the issue. Nothing is going to change unless we do that. We need to address the real issue of implicit bias and racism to really solve the issue of police brutality. Thank you.